data always is a validating factor and could boost the credibility of whatever your content is. So I think that's a pretty common standard practice that people understand. But you end up citing data that somebody else has done. Whatever your topic is, there's probably 5 other pieces out there that are sort of on that topic that are actually citing the same data you found because there's only so much data on a certain topic. And sometimes there is no data.
You're listening to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience, a podcast dedicated to helping executives train their sales and marketing teams to optimize growth. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. Let's accelerate your growth in 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience. I'm your host, Cory, and today we're joined by Becky Lawlor. She's the founder and chief research and content officer at Redpoint. Now, if you're not familiar with Redpoint, they're a company that specializes in creating data-driven content and original thought leadership research for B2B tech brands. With more than a decade of experience in the field, she has established herself as an expert in thought leadership content through an innovative approach, which we're going to learn all about, that's focused on original research to drive engagement and enhance brand storytelling. Becky, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Cory. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk through this topic because as a marketer myself who kind of got their start in content marketing, obviously a lot has changed since then, especially with the advent of AI. And I am still a huge fan of thought leadership content, and I know you are as well. So I'm excited to dig in.
Yeah, I think it's actually more valuable than ever with the introduction of AI.
Would definitely agree. But first, let's move back a little bit. So Becky, help people get to know you a little bit better, your career trajectory, if you will. So you've been helping B2B tech brands leverage this original research to elevate their brands. But what first inspired that? Was there kind of an aha moment?
Yeah, I've been in the B2B tech content marketing field for about 15 years. And initially I was just creating content as a freelancer. And so one of the things you find as a freelancer, you have a lot of clients that are in a similar space, but you're required to create differentiated content. And that was always a little bit of a challenge. You only had so much third-party research you could use. So one, that was just always a challenge that I had. But the first time I actually engaged with original research, I was working with Adobe, and they, as you probably know, they do a ton of this type of content with original research, and they handed me a data set and wanted me to write a report. And I just instantly kind of fell in love with that type of content. I think partially because it was kind of like a light bulb moment for me, like, oh, look, now I'm going to write something and I don't really have to worry about differentiating it. It is differentiated because nobody else has this data. And I also just really enjoyed the process of like looking at data and thinking about the narratives that it could tell. And so that's when I really became a fan of original research. And from there, I eventually got the training. I did kind of one-to-one mentoring with a woman who used to run Content Marketing's annual benchmark report that they put out. She's no longer there, but she used to do it for years. And she kind of walked me through the whole process. I worked with a client on a pilot project or 2. So now I've been doing this 5-6 years in terms of running my own research and being able to do all of that on my own. But I just am a huge believer that it is differentiated content and it does build your authority and it does actually generate higher engagement. And I sort of feel like the data bears that out as well. So that would be the final reason, is just really as a content producer, I want to deliver content that actually hits marketers' KPIs, actually helps them get the results they're looking for from their content. And I believe that content that has original research is truly the best type of content to do that.
Yeah. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And I personally have had that aha moment too, where you get the research study back and it's just a 120 slide deck. And, I remember then the team I was working with was like, who are we going to give this to? I'm thinking, me. They're like, they look to be different from that day on for sure. But I was really struck, Becky, by something you said when you said that once you looked at that data set that you were like, okay, wait a minute, we're already differentiated. Can you kind of explain that to our listeners who haven't maybe lived that moment for themselves?
Yeah, because going back to whenever you're doing like other content and you don't have your own data, as I said, the process is you're going to go out, you're going to use Google, or maybe these days you would use Perplexity or something else to find research to kind of validate and back up the points that you want to make. Data always kind of is a validating factor and kind of boosts the credibility of whatever your content is. So I think that's a pretty common standard practice that people understand. But you end up citing data that somebody else has done. And So, whatever your topic is, there's probably 5 other pieces out there that are sort of on that topic that are actually citing the same data you found because there's only so much data on a certain topic. And sometimes there is no data, which is another problem if you're a writer and you're trying to validate for your client something and you don't really have anything to validate it. I mean, there are some other ways you can go about that with interviews and stuff, but I would also argue that even interviews is a form of original research or insight. So I think the key point here is if you really want to stand out with your content, you have to be offering something that is a unique insight. It can't be something that can be found somewhere else. So if you're any type of research that you own, whether that is a survey-based, I want to be clear that that's not the only kind of research you can do. And I work with clients in all types, but it can be a unique analysis of a data set that's already out there. Maybe you go look at 250 SaaS websites and you're able to do some kind of analysis on those websites. If you happen to be selling something around websites, it would make sense to do that. It can also be your internal data. I've worked with clients that have internal data. Like I have a client that's in call analytics and we've, taken their call data, anonymized it, and looked at different trends and patterns that we could then share out for companies to benchmark against. So there are numerous ways to do this, but the bottom line is you are presenting something that is not out in the marketplace. These insights can't be found anywhere else.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. It's new, it's fresh, you can't find it anywhere. So then automatically it generates interest and engagement. And I've been thinking about this as I've listened to you talk. Okay, so that's one way in which the traditional B2B content model kind of falls short, right? We all quote the same thing when we're talking about X. I mean, I've done it before. I think there's that stat from that HBR article. It's 15 years old at this point. If you raise customer retention by 5%, it can raise profits 25 to 95. And everyone else uses it too. So that's one way that, we can kind of fall down if we go that route. What are some other common pitfalls that our traditional content approaches have in them that we might not recognize?
Yeah, I think another pitfall is, really it all comes down to just being generic in some way, honestly, because whether it's that you're just citing the same data as somebody else or whether you're just writing, even if you're not using data, you're just writing on almost every topic is out there on some level and some aspect. And so if you're just doing it generically, then you're not going to get a lot of engagement. But I think the other thing would be, even from an SEO perspective, I think backlinks is an important perspective. And that is something else that original research can generate for you because suddenly you are the person that owns the backlinks to the research. So now when everybody else is going out there, not you own the stats, you own the links, and everybody is linking back to you. So that's another important piece that I think a lot of people miss, that when they're doing traditional content, if you don't have that kind of original research, you're also not putting those kinds of valuable backlinks, which can help with your domain authority, just overall SEO search, all of that. In fact, I think there was a report last year released by StrataBeat that showed that original research for SEO, that the top 10 Google organic ranking keywords, that there's a 25% increase among those that were using websites using original researchers versus those that weren't. So again, there's some original research about how research can boost your SEO. So I just think there's so many ways that general content, it's that kind of like, we just should produce quality or quantity over quality, because I think, be honest here, it takes a lot more effort, time, money, resources to do original research than to just pump out a quick article on a topic.
Yeah, it definitely does, right? And I think that's one thing that has, I don't know if I want to say hindered, but at least been a barrier to this type of research in the past, right? If I think about it from terms of if I put my CFO hat on, right, and I'm looking at investments that are going out from content marketing, on the quarter or even across the year, and you've already hit on one big one, Becky, which is, okay, we can track something like SEO backlinks, right? Owning that, seeing our traffic increase, that's one big indicator. But I guess, how have you worked with brands in the past when they're kind of skeptical like that? Like, if we invest all this money, right, what are we going to measure to ensure we're getting some sort of meaningful return?
Yeah, well, I really work with what are your goals for this? Because it could be, everybody has different goals. So is it SEO? Is it lead gen? Is it PR? Is it a couple of those combined? But I think PR and lead gen tend to be the biggest, easiest ones to track. And that, because this is something else we haven't talked about, this kind of content will get picked up by the media way more than, again, you're not going to get some generic piece picked up. There's no reason for the media to pick it up. They love new surveys, new research, because back to the point, it's differentiated, it's something different. So, and media mentions is obviously very easy and trackable and short term. And same with if you're doing this as a lead gen campaign and you have a strong landing page and you're driving people to download the report. And this will go back to another thing I think is, I feel like personally, I mean, there's a lot of debate out there about gate or not to gate, but I feel like personally, this is the one type of content you actually can gate. And people, and I know I did this, but I actually surveyed 250 B2B buyers last year and asked them about like what content converts, what type of content they'll actually share their data for. And it came out that they were 2 times more likely to provide personal data for content that included original research than other types of content. So just again, that's another way to track the ROI that you're getting from it. And then obviously, are you generating traffic? But there's also other like soft ways, like I've seen a lot of clients use it. Their executive team can go to trade shows and speaking engagements, and sometimes have gotten speaking engagements that they couldn't get previously because now they actually had this valuable data, and that was more appealing to those running those conferences to have that as a presentation, of data versus just somebody up there speaking. So sales enablement is another great way to use it. And then I did want to also speak back to your point about like, well, the quantity over quality. CFO wants to know like, oh, you're putting out 12 articles or whatever. I do think that like investing in one piece of original research, like making it your foundational cornerstone piece of content, does a lot of things for you in terms of it allows you to then create content for a whole year. And first of all, you've just surveyed your target audience. So now you actually understand what's relevant to them, where they're having challenges, what type of content you should actually create. So you're not just guessing, you actually did some audience research while also creating engaging content. And then you can use that data in all of your content, all your blogs, all your infographics, webinars, whatever you're creating, social media, that data. And as you said, like you came out with 120 PowerPoint slide. If it's done right and you do deep data analysis, you have so many stats, so many different angles and hidden stories within that data that it really can fuel your content for a year. So you invest in one high quality piece, and then actually every piece of content you put out from there can be more of that quantity type. But now you're sprinkling your original insights into that content as well.
Yeah, it's well said. It's a good point. And one thing that really struck me in what you're saying, because I think there's a lot of confusion out there sometimes between what brand awareness means and brand authority means. And I was really struck by the example you said, give it to the executive team, and that will not only help them secure more speaking engagements, but it will immediately sort of build their credibility when they are on the stage. Can you talk about how that brand authority piece really helps engage an audience?
Yeah, I think it's really important. And I don't have the stats right in front of me, but I think like Edelman and stuff have done some like, brand trust. And there is a tie back. If you build your authority, you're actually going to close higher deals. You're going to close them easier. And one of the ways to build your authority is through research. And I think one example that everybody is very familiar with is Salesforce. I mean, everybody knows they do these annual like state of marketing reports. And I am a big believer that it's actually what helped create Salesforce to dominate, because they really invested in it early on. And I've seen other brands do this where they invest in it very early on and consistently. And it really does elevate their authority within their industry to where people know their names. They are looking for that annual report to come out every year. And just the fact that you have invested as a brand in your industry to do some kind of research to add to the kind of knowledge base of your industry actually really elevates your authority. And then it is different. Brand awareness is kind of just more that people know about you, obviously, which is where the media mentions come in. But I would also argue that media mentions build authority too, because you are kind of a talking head out there. But when you're showing that you're investing, you're in kind of understanding your space better and being able to speak to that you're building more authority.
So Becky, as you were kind of saying, right, it's great when you have this original thought leadership content that is backed by data, and you can break that out into lots of smaller stories that can really kind of fuel your content strategy for the entire year if it's planned out well. And I mean, you've worked with some big brands like Zapier, helping them do exactly that. And at the same time, I think it might be a little overwhelming for maybe smaller teams or maybe content marketing teams that are just kind of getting their feet wet in this. What would you recommend as far as a content strategy to really take full advantage of these, thought leadership pieces?
Yeah, I think to build the content strategy, you kind of need to do the research first, but you also have to have a research strategy before you do the research. And to that, I can speak a little bit more because I think this more maybe gets into a question we're asked later about mistakes that I see made, but is that often people don't think enough about the narrative they're trying to tell at the get-go, and therefore the data isn't compelling, or they just sort of have all these data points and they can't really make a good story, because I think at the end of the day, what makes good content is good storytelling. So you need to be thinking about that. So even for Zapier, that was a problem that they were having when I came and worked with them, is that they did have sort of a PR agency trying to help them with this, but the PR agency really didn't have like the data depth to do it. And so they were struggling both with the data analysis, and they were struggling with how to take that data and turn it into a story. So from that perspective, you really need to look for a partner. If you're going to invest in this kind of thing, I would highly recommend you just make sure that your partner understands how to do research from a content marketing perspective, first of all. Because if you go with like a market research firm, they know research, but they're not actually thinking about it from like a content, like what are the headlines going to be? What's the narrative going to be? That's a whole different ball of wax. On the other side, if you're using a PR or a content marketing agency, you need to make sure that they actually have the research chops to do it, because what I see often on that end is they're like, sure, we can do this. They don't actually know what makes a good survey. They don't have, and your survey may seem like it's not that important or it's easy to whip out, but it is actually the most critical piece of this whole thing. If you don't have a well-written survey on a number of levels, both from the how to write a quality survey so the data is quality, and also from how to write the questions in a way that turns into interesting headlines, while still being not biased and following best practices and all of those pieces, you're not going to end up with a good quality product at the end. So you're going to invest a lot of time, effort, and money and not end up with what you need to perform the way you need it to perform.
Yep. And like you said, that's not a good position to be in. A whole lot of time and money spent and not ended up with what you want. When we think back to how narrative and how research kind of fit together in that way, what are some really compelling narratives? Like, are there archetypal stories that you've seen work well time in, time out?
Yeah, I usually work from, again, I go from goals. So if PR is our goal, I want to really think about like, what are your top publications you'd love to get in? What do they care about? What are they writing on? So we start from that to build out the narrative. And then we think about like, what would your dream stats be? Another great way to start it is myth busting, because I think if you can get a shocking headline, and obviously you don't know for sure, but usually if you're in an industry and you really know your industry, you might actually know that there's things that people always say X, but actually Y is true. For example, or just that people won't necessarily confess publicly, but are true. Like, for example, I was doing one with a legal tech company, and they were pretty certain that in this certain issue that companies had actually been fined, maybe even like an inside consultant said like they've even seen jail time as a risk for companies for not, following these kind of certain standards. So we asked about that in an anonymized survey. We actually found out that, yeah, you know what? A third of companies had been fined, and, some had even had concerns about facing jail time. So, and I've seen other clients who are like, oh, nobody will answer that. And I'm like, well, they will when it's anonymized, not if you're going out and asking them to like tattle on their company. But when you have no idea who their company is, then they feel much more comfortable being open about what the true issues are going on behind the scenes. So I think, it's not being afraid to ask questions that might feel shocking, but you feel like you know from your own experience or word on the street in your industry are probably out there. I think that's a real kind of headline grabber when you can do that. So we kind of work through that process and just kind of hypotheses they might have and things like that.
Yeah, I really love the idea of the myth busting angle. I've seen that work time and time again. And also, I think you're right that people underestimate, for better or for worse, exactly how candid people will be when it's not going to be linked back to them, right? If you give them the invitation, sometimes they will walk right through that door and more.
Yeah, I actually had one. I did it with CMO Huddles and Bospar, which is a PR firm. And Bospar pushed us to put in there. It was kind of about the state of CMOs last year. And they actually pushed us to the PR firm. And look, we want a question there. We want to ask, like, how has the stress impacted? And they had things like sex life. Have you gotten a divorce? And I was like, oh my gosh, we're B2B, we're conservative. We're going to ask about their sex life if it's decreased. But you know what? People answered it. So, and you know what? That's a headline, right?
That is.
So that again goes to, you don't have to be that kind of, you got to be on brand with who you are, but just to the point again, like things that you think people wouldn't ask. And I thought this was like a survey with CMO Huddle's audience, I thought, oh, they're just going to all drop out when they get to that question, but they didn't. They answered it. So
Hey, that's telling. If just ask whatever you want to ask. You can always edit it out later, but better to ask more than ask less, it seems.
and, obviously you might have some that don't pan out. You don't know. This is a process of seeing what the data reveals. And I always tell clients too, like, we need to think of both sides. Like, if you're really not sure, but you want to ask a question, you need to think of like, okay, so if it doesn't like tilt in what would be our favor, either we could choose not to report it. I mean, you're not being dishonest by not reporting data that you get that you just choose not to report. But you could also think about, sometimes it's actually to your benefit to report it, even if it's not in your favor. One, you're building trust right there that you reported something that doesn't necessarily align with like, yeah, it doesn't really, sell our solution more or product more, but this is what came out of the data. And to think about why that is and what could be improved in that area or something. So I think that's actually a way to build additional credibility with your audience to kind of own that, yeah, this isn't ideal for us, but now we're going to dig into it.
Yeah, that's a really good point too, is that sometimes it can be a big learning moment as well, right? It's not, even if you don't get like, oh, this isn't the story we thought we would get, or people didn't respond in this way, it's not going to map neatly to the new product we just released, that kind of thing. It's like, it's also an opportunity to stop and take a step back and say, oh, well, why didn't our assumptions play out? Or why was the data so vastly different than what we assumed it was going to be?
Yeah, and it shouldn't be that way across every single question. Again, there's a lot of ways to build your survey right, but also test some things that you maybe don't know.
Okay. So I want to transition gears a little bit because we kind of teased in the beginning that we're going to talk about AI and its impact. And as I was thinking today about how I wanted to get at this question, I had something ping in the back of my brain. We're recording this in February 2025. And I remember way back in 2021 at the opening kind of ceremony of the Gartner CSO conference, they shared a stat which was 64% of B2B buyers cannot differentiate one brand's digital experiences from another. And that was in 2021. I can't help but see and feel that it's getting a little worse as we all seem to be cranking out this content. And, especially with some engines that are doing it, you can kind of tell, right? They favor certain sentence patterns. They favor certain ways of presenting data, which is really useful from a research perspective. But when it's just unfiltered into content, it almost feels like we're creating more noise and less value. What is your reaction then to AI and thought leadership content?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that AI is obviously it's producing a lot more. I mean, companies are using it to produce more content faster, right? So, but at the same time, AI is just a tool in my mind. So if you're just using it, and I think the most common use case is just for kind of that generic content that was out there before SEO. And if that's the type of content you were creating, I'll be honest, I think AI can do kind of a B+ job at that type of content without very much human you still want at least to have a human review it, but without that much human intervention. And, I did ask in my survey, I actually asked buyers how they felt about AI generated content. And I was actually surprised. I thought that a lot of them would be against it per se, but it was like around 60% that said they didn't mind AI content. And another kind of about 60% said didn't impact their trust of a brand. But based on all the other research stats where they did care about things, they wanted deeper analysis, they wanted these other things, and they clearly wanted more original research. That came up time and time again, that was the top type of content they would engage with, that it would build brand awareness and trust and authority and all those things. So what it said to me is, we don't, as audience, we don't care how the content is created. If you use AI to create parts of it or whatever, fine. We don't, it's like we don't care how the sausage is made as long as the sausage tastes good. So as long as your content that you output is quality, as long as it does have things that are relevant and insightful to us, that help me do my job better, that help me solve a problem I've had that I didn't know, that help me understand what my peers are doing that I might not be doing, to how I can benchmark against my peers, those are the things that they're still looking for, whether it's 2021 or 2025. And I think that, the challenge here is that AI is just flooding more of the generic stuff. And so it is becoming more important, I would say, to actually have content that differentiates from that, because there's just more of that noise out there. And so in my own opinion, I think that having content that has unique insights in it is going to be a higher value, it's going to perform better, and it's going to be about the only thing that does stand out.
Yep, I totally agree. All right. As we reach the end of the podcast, there are two questions that we ask every guest. And the first is looking 5 years out into the future, right? We just talked about the leap from 2021 to 2025, and a whole lot has happened in that time. So if we're looking to 2030, what is one shift coming for, the B2B content marketing space that, we might not see coming?
Yeah, I thought a lot about this, and I have no idea, but there is a lot of disruption right now. So anything is possible. Maybe AI bots will be writing all of our content and doing everything. But one thing I thought would be possible that could be really cool is maybe right now a lot of content is still one-sided. We present it out to the audience. It's a one-way conversation. So maybe tech and just the way it evolves will be a more participatory, dynamic type of conversations that we're able to have. Maybe, like embedded intelligence within content where, it doesn't just tell you what's happening in your industry, but you can actively like make decisions with it, pull up the data more, maybe even survey results or whatever coming in. I don't know. I think that maybe a more kind of participatory two-way conversation in real time in content would be pretty cool.
That's so cool. I love that. I've never heard that before.
Well, I don't know how to make it happen. You said imagine, so just imagining.
I mean, of course, I don't know how to make it happen either, but I'm so intrigued by it. I'm tempted to speculate. We already have great content recommendation AI agents, right? It seems like only so much of a leap to then embed that in a document. And it might be something like, oh, well, I find this stat really intriguing, how it relates to my industry. Were there more stats behind this or something like what's related to this? Even something like that would be so cool.
Yeah. And I tested there are some solutions out there where you can put on your website like a more participatory, like I can feed the data set into an AI widget or whatever you want to call it. And people can type in so it can kind of do segmentation to them based on what they're interested in. Like, hey, I'm actually in the healthcare industry. So can you give me the data set just for healthcare? Sometimes we segment that out in reports, but we usually don't segment out the whole data set or something. So there are already like little bits like that kind of out there that I think could get more sophisticated and interesting.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, final question. If you could, we've talked about going forward in time. Now we're going to go back in time. So go back 5-10 years, career advice that you would give your younger self. What would it be and why?
I think it would be to just be more confident is one thing that I think and maybe this is a woman thing of just feeling that I really had to be super dialed into every piece of and skill set that I have before I would go out and market it and sell it as part of what I do. And so I think I've realized over the years, I'm running a very successful business. I've been doing this for a long time. And the more that I've shown up with confidence, the easier it is for me to actually sell and do well. And so I think that, and I've seen it on the other end when I hire folks. Sometimes I hire people that have a lot of confidence and find out that that's, or elevated. But I think you just really have to show up with confidence. And then the second piece of that is face your fear and do it anyway. There are a lot of things I haven't wanted to do running my own business as an introvert, putting myself out there, social media, building my own authority. But every time I've faced my fear and done something that's uncomfortable for me, there has been growth personally, professionally. And it's really made me, again, much more confident to just do it.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. Yeah. And I think it's advice that we all need to hear again and again too. Especially you mentioned putting yourself out there on social media, right? Forcing yourself to do things like that as LinkedIn seems to every day now go a little bit further in the direction of Instagram. It's like, you log in and you think, oh, wow, how did they accomplish that? Or what are they doing? And it's so easy to compare yourself, right? It's so easy to think, maybe I'm not as good as X person, or maybe I'm not presenting myself in this way. But I think, like you said, Becky, a lot of that comes down to having the confidence and then acknowledging the fear and then kind of moving forward, moving past that. I think that's great advice for everyone. All right. Well, that brings us to the end. And if people want to learn more about you, more about this research study that we've been talking about, where should they go?
They can visit my website at www.redpointcontent.com or connect with me on LinkedIn. I post a lot there about research. It's just Becky Lawlor, Redpoint. Look me up.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks again, Becky. We appreciate it.
Thanks. Great being on.
You've been listening to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.